Your teachers are right about you. You're just a bad kid. Those words were uttered to me by my 6th grade principal. I don't blame him. I just got dragged in off the playground for getting in a fight with another kid. All right, it was a tough day. It wasn't the first time I was in the principal's office that year. It wouldn't be the last. I didn't know then, but I know now that that was kind of like one of the first primordial events in my teaching career. See, I gained a perspective about what it meant to be a bad kid, quotation marks, or to have a different set of expectations. From that experience, I was able to find out what worked for bad kids as a teacher. And I'm going to tell you today why big history is great for bad kids. So when I use the term bad kids, it's not a euphemism for at-risk students or any other type of descriptor. When I use it, I'm using it to refer to any student that historically hasn't been good at history, or someone who really just doesn't do school well. When I say big history, to me, I define big history as teaching all 14 billion years of history through every single discipline I can get my hands on, while explicitly teaching skills, more skills, and as many skills as I can in the process. I'm going to make the claim that bad kids thrive when you give them a workshop and challenge them to make something new. And for me, the best workshop that I've found is using a big history approach. So again, when you think about teaching 14 billion years of history and using interdisciplinary thinking, people often conceptualize your classroom as like space age, or like it's an Apple store, right? With like backlighting and sleek designs and a hologram of Bill Gates that pops up and teaches a lesson or two when you're not feeling up to it. But to me, really, you should take a more earthy, organic view of teaching big history. To me, it's a workshop. Not like your neighbor's garage or basement or spare bedroom workshop. Not like the workshop of the person who really likes to wear jorts and cares about lawn care. I'm talking about like the workshop. The best way I can describe it would be Thomas Edison's workshop. Back when I was in Boy Scouts, before they kicked me out, because apparently stone cold stunning someone during a troop meeting is frowned upon in Boy Scouts. We went to Thomas Edison's workshop in West Orange, New Jersey. I'll never forget it. I remember our park ranger tour guide, he went behind like a bookcase and he pulled out an elephant ear, right? Because it turns out that Thomas Edison had every single material he could think of, that he could find in his workshop while he was trying to find the best filament for the light bulb. So he collected everything he could, right? He had assistants just working on finding materials, finding new tools, right? Just building his library as big as he could and making it the most efficient as possible. And to me, that's a perfect metaphor for big history, right? There's a team of people constantly collecting resources, calling on networks, and building up the library of content, the library of tools. It's not like every single day Thomas Edison was like, let me get my cup of coffee and my elephant ear, right? I need to go to work today. Some tools and materials they would use sparingly, right? Maybe once or a couple times every decade. But some tools they would use every single day. And when you think about teaching bad kids, the workshop and the tools metaphor are great, right? Because it applies to their life, right? They can conceptualize that. Like, hey, I can use this, right, when I leave this class. This isn't just some esoteric, history thing that I won't ever use. To me, big history helps bridge that gap, right? And I think that this talk will help further bridge that gap and really sell your students on why, these skills in a big history classroom are really going to help them out. This might help with your buy-in, this might help with your peers' buy-in, and again, your students' buy-in. You can use these terms, you can use these analogies and metaphors as much as you want. So again, some tools are used every single day, and some tools are used sparingly. I want to talk about 3 tools: a level, duct tape, and WD-40. So when we start building skills, when I really think about what the quote-unquote bad kids respond to in my class, the first one is always claim testing. We borrow a page from mathematics and really science, and we ask students to operationalize the way that they test claims. So when they hear something being said, right, first they're going to go to their intuition, their gut feeling, right? Then they're going to go to systemic reasoning and logic. Then they're going to find an authority or evidence after that to back up their claim. So if you think about kids that are not traditionally good at school, if they have this level where they can find out if a claim is true or false, right, and they could kind of read the bubble themselves, right, they're going to love it. Right? Imagine if you tell your students who are sitting near the window or in the back of the classroom, hey, I want you to learn this so you can tell me when I'm wrong. Or you can tell your other teachers or your homies, right? Or the smart kid on the other side of the class who thinks they know more than you, right? The kids respond to that, right? It weaponizes this ingenuity that a lot of bad kids build over the years as they actively resist school. So why not use that and direct that towards positive academic outcomes? The second thing, right? WD-40. Stuff that makes everything kind of move a little easier would be the writing components. Right, so the concentrated effort to teach every single aspect, every criteria of the writing rubric. Right, there's lessons that just explicitly teach each part of that. Right, and there's writing components scattered throughout the whole course. I always say, I tell my students all the time, writing is being a more efficient writer and a more dynamic and more effective writer is going to make all aspects of your life better. And I don't think that's any more apparent than today during this pandemic where more and more people are working remotely. Right? Your ability to write, right, and use the written word is so important. Right? So the investigations, right, the explicit lessons that talk about building a thesis or a claim, about using supporting evidence, about contextualizing, right? All of those lessons have such an awesome impact on students. My favorite thing is that I always print out their first investigations, right? The baseline. And I'll print out, the investigation 1 as well. And I'll give them the last investigation before we leave in June, in New Jersey. And the students just loll, right, at how much their writing has improved every year. Right? And the kids talk about it, right? And we've done it before with investigation 6 or 7, right? And the kids talk about it, right? And it's a really cool proof point for them to say, look how far I've come. And last but not least, the duct tape of the workshop, of the Big History workshop, is the critical thinking skills, right? It's a thing that can kind of pull together any aspect of their education, right? It can wrap together, right, and hold strong any aspect of their academic life. Like the ability to determine causation, right? When students are able to look at long-term, intermediate, short-term causes, trigger events that lead to consequences, right, or effects. When they can track continuity and change over time, right? When they can properly contextualize, right? All those critical thinking skills, to think across disciplines, right? To think about, history in terms of, not just military and political history, but think about the resources and the economics, all the things that, have impacted historical events. Thinking across scales and interdisciplinary thinking is the duct tape, right? And students see that. One of my favorite things is developing a podcast, and I let every single kid in the class, pre-COVID, has had the opportunity to jump on the podcast and have, their perspective shared. I love it. And they talk about things like, just seeing the chemistry in history, right? Seeing how plate tectonics and geology impacted, the development of civilizations, right? They can start making those connections, right? And it's the duct tape that can hold it all together. I know it's not perfect, right? Maybe duct tape doesn't last forever, but at least, it gives them a shot to pull things together and start using those secondary tools and materials after that. Last but not least, I want to just talk about the social dynamic of the big history classroom. Bad kids who aren't historically good at school, all right, they thrive with the brain coupling, right? To stay in New Jersey and go to Princeton and talk about Yuri Hassan and his brain coupling theory. When you go to a conference and you sit and receive, you don't learn as much as the coffee clutch where you get the engaging conversation. There's so much discussion in the big history classroom. Right? And if you do it right, if it's an elective or a main course, you're going to have a spectrum, right, of school ability levels, or school conditioning as I like to call it, right? Intelligence levels, you're going to have interests, right? All different things. And the idea of having these conversations where you can build this group cohesion and the teacher is the lead learner is so important. To go back to the Edison, right, analogy, or the idea that he used unconventional methods. They said the man used to take a nap every afternoon and hold ball bearings because he thought that, when he was sleeping, he'd have great ideas, and he'd fall asleep, the ball bearings would drop and hit the plate, right? And he would have this discourse, right? And he'd jump up with his assistants and they'd go tackle a certain problem. So big history's ability to think outside the box, right, really helps bad kids. So in closing, say it with me. Big history is good for bad kids. All right, guys, have a great year.